Slurpty-derp, volume 9364. How's it going, my G's? Hope you're doing super well. Today I've got some tofu, and there's not a lot of other sound designers on YouTube that, you know, not only share my sound secrets and all that, but also throw sort of tofu around and stuff. Yeah. Anyway, today I'm going to make a French horn bass because I just got back from France recently. Yes, thank you. I had a lovely, lovely time. Even got to spend one evening having a barbecue with both my nanas. I've got two nanas, that's right. One from the UK and one from Germany. So it was a double Nana Neurofunk Nintendo battle where everyone except Pikachu won. So that's very exciting, isn't it? Anyway, today I've got a French horn bass, and it's a little bit different today because it's not a completely Vital specific tutorial, although I will be using the synth known as Vital, which is free. A lot of the other plugins that I'm using as well are free, because I love using free plugins, because I feel like anyone can make music for free these days. And so if you're in a poverty-stricken country, if you've got a computer and some Wi-Fi and like a good, or not just a pair of earbuds, you might be able to make some music as well. And no, seriously speaking though, I think there's so many great free plugins, and I try to use as many of them as I can. So most of them I use today are free. There's a couple which aren't, but let that not deter you, because I'm sure you could find a replacement that would be just as good, my G's. Anyway, yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to preview the little French horn sound that I've made by a combination of processing and lots and lots and lots of plugins. And then I'm going to walk you through each individual plugin, why I chose to use it at that particular stage in the processing process. Yes, and yeah, let's start off with having a little listen to my French horn loop. So starting from absolute scratch then, I got a horn sample from the BBC Labs Spitfire audio kind of plugin. And what I've done is I've basically bounced out two versions of the sound, one at this octave and then one at this octave, with a little semitone up sort of grace note at the end. And yeah, so what I've done after that, I've bounced that out, is I've used this exact same MIDI pattern and place this in a Vital patch to sort of make a sub bass to fit underneath the sound, because it's kind of lacking in synthetic bass. So we're going to run over that Vital patch first quickly, and then I'll show you what I did to the individual horn samples, the one that was lower and the one that was higher up. So with the Vital patch, I essentially wanted to have a sub bass, but wanted to have some extra juicy harmonics in there as well. So it's quite an easy patch, and I'm starting off with the low kind of fundamental sub bass here. Don't know if you can hear that on your iPhone speaker, but yeah, then we've got another couple of oscillators, and they're both at -12, so they're both an octave up from the sub bass, and they're just detuned to each other. So one's at -10, one's at +36 to create this kind of wobble. So we've got this nice wobble here, but I'm going to take out a bit of low end of that so that the sub still has a bit more space. So I'm going to run oscillator 1 and 2 through filter 1, and here I've sort of taken out some of the low end, as you can see. And now we add in our third oscillator, the main sub underneath it. Oh my G's, how excited are you for that? Yeah, and then and then I'm a little bit crazy today, sorry about that. Yeah, and then we're gonna not filter that, so this is turned off here, the oscillator 3. So we've got that full sub signal underneath. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of texture, because the horns samples, they were missing that low end synth subby bass, and they were also missing quite a lot of textural high end. So I added in a bit of pink noise, and I've added this in through a filter here on the sample mode, taking out the low end. And then there's just a bit of randomization on the level and the panning of the noise with the random button here, and that also gets FM'd a little bit into my low kind of sub bass here, a really small amount. I think if you have a look, it's probably 1%, 1.1%. Yeah, and one last final little thing. There's a little bit of a more grittier growl that comes from this patch, which is when you FM those two sine waves that are higher up in octave together. So FM from oscillator 2 here, Or do I go from oscillator 3? From oscillator 3, from the low one. That's a little bit growlier. Anyway, just with the effects, I literally just have a little bit of distortion on the sinefold mode, driving it up a little bit here. And that's pretty much the vital bass. So now let's move on to the fun stuff, which is processing the horn sounds. So the first horn sound that I have is the low one here. And what we're going to do is we're going to process it to make the sound design a little bit more interesting. Then we're going to layer it up with the higher up horn as well. And then we're going to route all of them through a group together with the sub. And then we're going to add some extra processing to all of it together to fit it all together, and also apply some extra movement on our LFO tool as well. So with the low horn, all I've done is I've used the Ruiner plugin, which is free. And this is just going to, I'll show you, I'll blend it in here because it's sort of around here. So I'm blending in a bit of this distortion, which I've just adjusted using the Doom mode here and the Saturate mode a little bit of overdrive, and then blending it in on sort of dry wet. Not too much, otherwise it starts to lose its sort of punch and character. But just a little bit of nice distortion around there. It's almost like a sort of guitar amp or something, perhaps in this case. Then I've taken out a lot of low end to allow for that sub and kind of, the super sub to really take dominance in the low area. There we go. So when you layer it up, coming through quite uninterruptedly. Then I've spread the sound a little bit. I've put a bit of riff feedback light on with a bit of ping pong, just to give a bit of stereo width. And then we have an LFO, which is going to be, we'll sort of cover this a little bit later on. So I'll leave that off for a minute. And we'll just move on to the high horn next. So by using the high horn as well, I can get some extra harmonics in the high end, and I'm going to process it differently, so it's going to layer up the sound in a different way. And I'm actually going to show you what it sounds like with the low horn together, because we're trying to blend them together. So as I'm designing it, I'm sort of playing them both at the same time. And so the first thing I do is I add on a bit of ring mod from Kilohertz. Not sure if this one's free or not now, but if it's not, it's definitely worth having. I think it's really cool. Just adding some nice extra harmonics into the sound to make it a little bit different. Then we're going to take out a bit more low end here, and a lot more than on the low horn, so we're really just using the high end of this sound. And again, I'm going to stereo spread it using the Rift feedback light here. And it's got a really nice sort of like kind of growly character in the high end. And when you add them together, I'm going to tell you about the volume levels as well, which is really important. So that high one is really a last minute addition, because I've actually turned it down -10, and the low horn is sort of at -5, and my super sub is at 0. So the sub, like the main sort of powerful part of the sound, is the priority, you know? So that's really, really loud. And then the low horn is sort of like the middle ground, so it's a little bit further back in the mix. And then the high horn is sort of right at the back of the mix. And what I could actually do is I could probably add in a bit more reverb onto that one as well. So I'm going to put a bit of chrome reverb on. Just to push it even further back. I think that's even nicer now. So with the high horn and the low horn sort of processed separately, and the super sub doesn't really have any processing on it individually, we can now move on to the main fun part, which is processing the whole group together. So now let's process the whole French horn. So it sounds cool already with my drums that I made on a video earlier, but it's not. It could be a little bit more prominent, a little bit punchier, a bit more, mainly have a bit more clarity and high end, and also have some more movement in the sound. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to process the hell out of it, and we're going to use a bunch of plugins that a lot of them are free. Some of them are Logic, one or two of them are like ones that I've acquired over the years that weren't free, but doesn't mean that you can't sort of do the same result yourself. So I'm going to start off with the Fire, which is a brilliant plugin which is free, and it's like multi-band saturation. I love it. It's kind of like maybe the FabFilter Saturn perhaps, but free. And yeah, in the high end you can just drive up the signal with a different sort of option here of clipping, and I've got a cubic one on here, driving it up and then mixing it in so it's like a parallel effect here. So let's play the bass on its own. So just finding a sort of sweet spot around there, and so that's already kind of bringing it into a bit of a more like brighter realm. And yeah, again, like I'm still missing a bit of brightness from those horns. They're a little bit dull, so I'm just boosting on a high shelf the whole lot again here. You can see in the EQ it's kind of missing a lot of frequencies there. So a lot of this is what I'm doing is sort of saturating the high end. Again, with the SDRR, which I don't believe is a free plugin, but it's very, very nice anyway. But there's a lot of other plugins that will do the same job. Anyway, I'm sort of just boosting up the treble here. So just kind of saturating the high end and colouring it a nice little amount. That's really, really nice at that point. Then I've got a little bit of a Waves plugin here, which I like, called the MV2, and this is on the low level 3.6. So I've kind of just mixed it in here to boost the low end of the sound a little bit more. Yeah, just left it around there. Pretty nice, in my opinion. Then I've got another little bit of reverb, and I'm just tickling the high end a little bit to kind of give a bit more harmonics and more content in the high end, really. Because if you think about it, the dry is at 100%. So the wet that I'm adding in, I'm just literally adding in more volume and adding more to the sound. So a lot of these effects, I'm adding, I'm trying to maximize the sound and make it greater. So I'm not like sacrificing the dry signal. I'm only adding to the dry signal. Next up, I decided I would start sidechaining the sound. So I've added already an LFO tool here, which is going to be sidechaining to my kick. And we can start to listen to it with the drums here. And you can hear it ducks out, but it's not quite as like intense as I want it. So I've just literally copied it over and made another one. And here, you can hear it's exaggerated that sidechain gap a little bit more. And while I'm on the point of LFOs, I'm going to jump back over to the individual sounds here, the individual layers, and I'm going to show you another thing I did, because I wanted to add another volume gap into the bass kind of groove, like kind of randomly. So what I ended up doing was I made another LFO here, and had this sort of gap here in the middle, not necessarily on one of the kicks or snares, just randomly in the sort of halfway through the loop. Just spat everywhere. And I did the same thing on the high horn as well, so putting another one on here. So if you listen with the drums, so I've got a nicer kind of groove. The thing is though, is that I didn't want to do it all the time on the sub. So what I did with the sub is I basically made another LFO where I take out this little volume gap as well as I have on the horns, but the second time it happens, I don't have the volume gap, so the sub will stay running underneath. So it'll give a bit of a dynamic contrast where, on one part the sub will like keep going, but the horns on top will like do their little gap thing, but the sub will stay there at one point. But at the previous point, they will both sort of stop together, So how I drew it in was I just put it to 2 bars instead of 1 bar, and then found the exact point where that kind of gap is, and just drew it in the one time and left it out for the second time. So if you listen with the kind of bass together, So when you get to this second part here, the horns duck out, but the bass keeps running. And on this first part here, you know, they all duck out together. So we have that nice little contrast. So that makes it a lot more interesting in terms of, you know, how the layers are kind of working a little bit independently from each other as well. So yeah, that kind of wraps up my LFO tool, but let's go back to the processing. And I've done a little bit of extra ruiner on the whole sound. But as you can see, this is on a LFO here. So I've blended in the signal on an LFO, so it doesn't happen, it's not always on, so it's going to come on and off in a kind of I think 1/2 or 1/4 pattern. So I've made some nice settings that I like, this crunchiness to the sound with the saturate turned up and the fold a little bit and the overdrive. And then what I've done is I've modulated the blend. And what's great about this is you can actually introduce some noise into the LFO, which is wicked. And yeah, so what I've done is I've done like a saw down LFO. And by adding in this noise, it's kind of making it a bit wobbly and a bit more random every time it does it. So that's cool. Yeah, but that's a really nice little addition and get a nice crunchy sort of rhythmic distortion into the sound. Then I've got a bit of fresh air and literally just a bit of mid-air there. It's nothing new really, that one. I've boosted the sort of treble a little bit, or low treble. Here I'm just trying to maximize the last sort of parts of the sound. And again, I've gone for another bit of fire on the multi-band. This time I've used a different setting, which is a bit softer and a bit more subtle, driven it up. Mixed it in a little bit there. Then finally, a little bit of a side cut to you know, I'd sort of panned out these horns left and right with the ping pong delay, and they created a stereo image. And yeah, we're just gonna sort of take out a bit of that like stereo information down here. Not too much, because I quite like having still a little bit around, you know, this area. And finally, another channel EQ, and what have we done here? Tiny little boost right at the end in the mid-range, just because it kind of was lacking a tiny bit there, I felt. So that's the final French horn bass. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed that very much. I enjoyed making this sound. I think it's pretty cool. As always, make sure you subscribe if you appreciate the content. And if you want to take things a step further and you really think, yeah, this guy's wicked, I really want to help him out, join on my Discord. Come and say hello in there. Hit me up for mentorship sessions. Check out my website. I've got merchandise, presets, sample packs, all that stuff. My music as well. And yeah, hope you guys have a lovely, lovely weekend. Much love. Don't do anything I wouldn't.